title of this session is Establishing Left Hand and Finger Placement in First Position. I'm going to begin by talking about the body's natural tendencies when it comes to this left hand in placing it in first position. One of those tendencies is a collapsing wrist. If you start by shaking your hands down at your sides and letting them just fall loosely, and then bring your hands up, the natural tendency for the body is for the weight of the hand to go backward just a little bit. So sometimes we'll get a collapsing wrist with students. Another thing that happens very naturally when we bring our arms up this way is we don't go in. I do that because I've been trained for so long playing the violin, but working with a beginner, we will find that they will almost always have the elbows go out a little bit. So if you bring your hands up and you think about what your elbows naturally want to do, they want to go out. And so if I use this ruler as a sample fingerboard here, I would see this happening where the student's hand is bending over toward the right, the fingers are leaning toward the right, and the elbow is leaning toward the left. So that's a second thing that we want to think about. A third thing is our natural desire to hold on to things that may seem to be extending away from our bodies. So when we have the students put instruments up into playing position, their natural tendency, because this end of the instrument is far removed from the trunk of our bodies, is to squeeze, to hold on tight, because they've been told hold on tight to their parents' hands, and babies naturally want to cling to things. They have a natural human instinct to do that. And we have to think about that tendency when we begin asking students to keep their hands supple, loose, and flexible when they're holding the instrument. Another thing that happens is that they tend to tuck their hand underneath the neck, where if the collapsing wrist happens over here, we work with the wrist, but sometimes it happens both in tandem with this elbow going out, fingers going to the right. Now the whole hand is tucked underneath the neck. And finally, once we start asking students to put their fingers down on the fingerboard, they press their fingers sometimes too much forward in a forward movement, which again causes the wrist to go out toward the left and the elbow to go out toward the left. And what we want to do is have them think backward in their touch on the string. So in order to counterbalance the body's natural tendencies that don't work so well when we're playing upper string instruments, we want to emphasize certain shapes of the left hand. One of those is a straight line from these knuckles, the base knuckles of our fingers, all the way down to the elbow. That this doesn't go inward, this wrist joint, and more importantly, doesn't go outward. This is an even more tense position. Another thing is that we want to have the base of the index finger, we're going to put some marks here in a minute, this joint at the high string side of the instrument. So for violins it will be right next to the E string, for violas right next to the A string. Another thing that we want to do for our shape is have a 3-point contact with the neck. So I can use a pencil or I can use a ruler. I will have the pencil on the side of the index finger just like the neck would be, and I'm going to contact there, contact with the finger, and contact with the thumb. So talking about the 3 points of contact with students is a good thing if it looks like they're having too much contact other places, for example the inside of the hand, which can help alleviate that wrist collapsing. And finally, we want to talk about the angle of the fingers, particularly the first finger, or the first and second finger. I'll use the ruler again, it's a little easier for this to be seen. When the first and second finger go down on the string in a correct position, they lean a little bit toward the G string or C string side of the instrument in their correct placement. And when the student picks up the instrument, the fingers off of the instrument, they should see that the line that is created by depressing the strings on their fingertips is slightly to the left of center. So you can have the students check that for themselves and not in the center of the finger, or worse yet, to the right side as they're looking at their palm. The native hand position is something that we want to talk about. It's the same thing that we did at the beginning here, where we just have our hands hang down at the sides, bring the hand up, and just let the hand go into its natural position. The wrist will probably be back slightly, and drop down. I like doing things with two hands first because I'm right-handed, and so when I do it with both hands, my right hand that's dominant helps guide my left hand. So we'll start with both, drop the right, and notice whether this has a bend in the wrist or not, this left hand, and just go to a straight position from the knuckles to the elbow with a straight line. In that hand position, which Roland calls the native hand position, you may notice a few things about the fingers. My fingers might fall slightly different places and heights and depths, and my thumb also might come in a different place than what my students' hands will do, than what your hands will do. Every hand is slightly different. But there are some similarities and commonalities among our hands, and one of those is that the first finger almost always goes away from the other three. And that I'm not intentionally doing. If I did it with my right hand, the same thing would happen. And I'm not used to doing that movement with my right hand. So what this tells us is that we can very naturally take a pencil, as you saw in the film, and just get the fingers to sit on the top of a pencil, and the first finger will naturally want to start to split away from the other three. We'll talk about that and do that as an action in just a moment. There's another characteristic of our fingers and our hand that's also important to think about, and that is that the flexion of our hand when we grab for things has more strength than the extension of our hand when we pull away. So we need to think about that in terms of playing. When we're lifting our fingers up, we need to have some quickness and agility in order for our fingers to do the best job that they can in playing. And so we want to strengthen the outside of the hand by lifting, doing some lifting exercises, starting with the fingers down and having them come up with strength. So tapping downward is one type of strength that's more of a natural thing for us to do, and lifting up is a second type of strengthening and quickness that we want to develop in our students. Roland put in his information in his Teaching of Action in String Playing book 5 actions to help establish this left hand and finger placement. And the actions are, I'll give you the names of them and then I'll go through them with you. The first one is called silent preparation. The second is placing the first finger, high second finger, and third finger in first position. The third action is called the octave game. The fourth is percussion play. And the fifth is the low second finger placement. One of the principles that Roland will say, always talked about this when thinking about beginners and teaching students how to establish this left hand, was don't just stick with one finger for a while, a week or 2 weeks only open and first, and then maybe a couple of weeks with open first and second. He was very encouraging about going ahead and shaping the hand, thinking again about how the body moves and what's natural to the body, and then putting the hand into that position, and then going to the smaller muscles of and the smaller extension of the hand, the fingers, in placing them down on the string so that they're already right there, and it doesn't take a whole week of practice just to get the first finger. It's going to be first finger, and then it's going to be third finger, and then we're going to set the second finger next to the third finger for a high placement, and then next to the first finger for a low placement. So all that's going to happen fairly quickly in a student's learning. So let's go through the silent preparation. The first thing that we'll do is put an X at the base joint on the side of the hand of the index finger, and that's going to be on the left hand. And this sometimes is referred to as a magic X. I think Mimi Zweig came up with that term, but Paul Rowland said put an X there because that's going to be the contact with the neck. And we don't want the contact to be dropping down below the neck or sitting too high above. So this is a really good guideline for the student's hand. The next thing is we have to think about what the student will see when the instrument is up in playing position. They won't be able to see the X. So Professor Rowland said put a line from the X right across the base joint, and that's what students will be able to see when their hand is in playing position, back in first position. So the X and the line across the base joint will be the first things that we'll do in our silent preparation. Now what we're going to do is bring this hand up into native position, have these three fingers rather close together, first finger's a little bit away, and I like using a fat marker like this or a pencil as you saw in the film, and just set those fingers down onto the pencil. I like to think of the top of this pencil or marker as a balance beam. I remember as a kid, I think I was in school, they had a balance beam that gymnasts would use. It's only 4 inches wide, I believe, but it was very close to the ground. It was only maybe a few inches off the ground. And that was a balancing exercise for us to do in physical education. And that's what I think about here, is that the fingertips need to balance on top of the pencil. The other thing that we're doing is covering up the X while we go there. So if you have a student do this themselves, they can put their hand up in native position, check for their straight line. They can take the pencil and slip it underneath their fingertips, but they'll have to adjust their fingers slightly so that they will go on the top side of the pencil, and then cover up the X. So now from this side, you see that the X has disappeared and the fingertips are on the top, and my first finger is just naturally starting to pull away. I'm not making it do that, there's just a natural gap that occurs there. The next thing that I'm going to do is have the thumb just rest on the other side. I'm not going to try to put it someplace where I think it should go. I'm not going to try to make it absolutely flat. Some teachers teach that way. My thumb doesn't go flat. My thumb is at a slight angle when I'm holding my instrument, and in other words, it's not flat this way. It turns a little bit sideways, and that's okay wherever the thumb goes naturally. In order to test what's natural for a student's thumb, have them tap very gently on the other side of the pencil or the marker that they're using. And then once the thumb is established, usually it's right by the first finger. It might be a little in front of the first finger. It could even be a little bit behind. Some people are all the way up by the second finger, but that begins to have a little bit of tension there. So wherever it falls naturally. And then the last thing is to slide the first finger back. We want to make a little bit bigger gap between the first finger and the other three fingers. And that is going to be our hand position then when we put it up onto the instrument. So if you would do that with me, let's review all of those steps. You may have been doing it along, but let's just go over that one more time. Put your magic X, put your line at the base of the index finger, Have your hand down at your side, have a marker or a pencil in your other hand, bring your hand up to native hand position, check for a straight line. Now bring the pencil or the marker under the fingertips, have all the fingertips sit on the top in a line, cover the magic X and touch it with the pencil. Tap your thumb on the other side so that it falls naturally. It will be slightly above the level of the pencil. It shouldn't be way down here, nor should it be way up here, but just slightly above. Oops, did you see my magic X start to appear? I want to cover that up. And then pull the first finger back. One more step that we'll add to this is feel like the fingertips are clinging to the pencil. Just like a child clinging when you can lift an infant up off the ground. Their hand naturally will cling. It's the same feeling here. If it's hard for your students to feel that, you could have them take their thumb off. The clinging is even more evident when the thumb is not even touching. So that's a way to feel that natural clinginess. Okay, so that's going to be the silent preparation exercise. But yet we still have a few more steps because we want to apply it to the instruments. So let's get our instruments. And now we're going to assume that the students already have been able to get their instrument up into playing position. I would say do some pizzicato with their left hand, fourth finger or third finger, gradually bringing the instrument up into playing position and stopping there. And now what we're going to do is something that we haven't done yet, and that is touch the X on the E string side of the violin or A string side of the viola. Have the thumb fall naturally wherever it feels comfortable, slightly above the fingerboard, and just slide back and forth. Now we see in the film that the students are sliding with their fingertips up straight, but I do know from experience with Professor Rowland, he was always about no excessive tension, so have your fingertips as relaxed as possible. If they droop down like this, that's even better. As long as the student can still see that line, and the line, if I can turn toward the camera, is just sliding right along the E string side. We're going from first position to middle or low to middle, and as you've learned from the shuttle, that's something that students will be able to do already. So the next action is placing the first finger, high second finger, and third finger in first position. And there are several principles to keep in mind when you're introducing the fingerings for your students. Number one is that you don't want to just stick with the first finger and do it over and over again for a long time, a week or two. You want to go in rather rapid succession from first to third and then second when initially placing the hand and teaching the student how to find that second finger. And then after that, in order, open 1, 2, 3, all probably within that very first lesson where they're learning how to establish this left hand. The next principle is to do left hand pizzicato, of preparing the hand, and when we get to the octave game, we'll see how that third finger preparation will work for pizzicato first and then playing in tune. And another thing is to watch the angle of that first finger. Try to be sure that the fingernail is looking toward the student's face. And then finally, emphasizing those octaves with multiple ways of playing. Pizzicato, doing it with the bow, adding some slurs, and then at a later time adding some shifting, which will include the shuttle action with first position, third position harmonic for the octaves. So all of this is great ear training. It helps intonation, and it also helps establish the shape of the hand. Now what we're going to do is place the first finger on the string. And when we do that, we want to have another mark. So let's go ahead and put the instrument down and get the pen. By the way, this is washable marker. Permanent marker is probably not the best choice to use with your students. And just like in the film, you saw two eyes, a nose, and a nice little smile. I started calling this your fingernail friend can practice with you at home. That was the rest of the sentence. So with your fingernail friend now, we're going to go through that whole process from here up into playing position over here. And now we're going to slide back and forth between first and third or fourth position, this low to middle shuttle action. Notice I'm almost always, when I do shuttle with beginners, I have them hold right here. Now I'm going to go to the end of the fingerboard, curl up my first finger, place it on the E string, or A or D, any of those. I would not go over all the way to the lowest string in the first trials of putting the finger down. I'll do this on the E string, and check to be sure that the fingernail friend is smiling at you and not looking up at the ceiling or off to the side. So that will help them, encourage them to curve their finger more. That first finger, after we put it on the pencil, going back causes it to be more bent, and that's something that sometimes is a little difficult for students. So fingernail friend is down. When I lift, I see my line that's right next to the E string side, and now I can just test the sound of it. And I'll lift it and put it back down again and lift. And we want to do several of those by plucking or not. We can actually do some exercises that are like, I think of it as a diving board. I did a lot of swimming when I was a youngster, and jumping off of a diving board is what this reminds me of. So whatever image you can use that will make an impression on your students of depressing that string and then springing back up. The spring back up is where we're exercising those extensor muscles, which is going to aid us in very good fingering and intonation. Okay, so after we have that first finger in a good position, let's just check a couple of things. How's the arm doing? Has it gotten static tension started to build up, or is it feeling comfortable and loose? So let's just swing it a little bit. Let's put our fingers up in the air and wiggle them and make sure we don't have any tension starting to happen in the hand. Let's tap the thumb a few times, very gently. I always tell students, tap gently. And let's put the instrument down for one more marking, and this is not in Professor Rowland's book, but it's something that works for me, because I sometimes would have still trouble with students not having this straight line here. And so I started taking my pen. So I have the X, the line, now my fingernail friend, and then I would take my pen and put two little dots right near my nail on the thumb, and those are two little eyes that are going to be looking straight up at the ceiling. When students think about the tip of the thumb pointing up, that often will straighten this wrist out. So these are the shapes that we want the students to be thinking about, and all of these little helps can give them images that will encourage them to remember what it's supposed to look like. After you've given them a lesson, they go home and they need to remember all of those steps in order to form those good habits. The last thing then is going to be adding the other fingers. So let's do one more time, starting in rest position, plucking, moving up into playing position. Let the arms swing just a little bit here. Stop the swinging and plucking. Slide back and forth, shuttle between middle and low. Check for your magic X to be touching next to the side of the high string side of the instrument. And now put your fingernail friend down. Let's do it on the A string this time. Spring up a few times with the first finger. And now press down the first finger. Now let's go to third finger and spring up a few times with third. And now leave third down, and let's hear what that sounds like. And now we're going to check with the D string. Since I'm on the A string, I'm going to make an octave D with it. And then finally, let's take the second finger and set it right next to the third finger. Now, viola players, if you're students, or particularly if you have older students who are larger, they have a large viola, there won't be touching necessarily for that second finger to be in tune. So you might just say next to or close to, but for violins, even with full-size violins, the fingertips touch. Once in a while, a student will try to touch their finger all the way back to here, and I'll see them going like this because I just said touch your fingers together. Beware that they might be thinking that it should touch all the way down, but I realize no, it's really a touching at the fingertips where they're together. So let's check that third finger again with the D. And now let's lift up the third finger and hear what this C sharp sounds like. And then practice maybe going over to D after the C sharp. And then let's go back to B and the extensor, pull up quickly. And you should be seeing your fingernail friend. And now pull up quickly and keep a nice soft little open rooftop here and play the A to the D. That's how I would form the student's hands to get all of the fingers down. The third action is called the octave game. What we'll do with the octave game is once the instrument is set and the left hand position is established, we'll do lots of practice of having the fingering in tune with the open string next to it, the adjacent one. I'll start on the A string and play up a scale. First I'll just do 2 plucks for each note. And then check the octave. And check a couple of things. Leaning backwards just a little bit with the fingers helps to emphasize the clinginess feel, what we talked about with the pencil and silent preparation hold. So having that feeling of the fingers leaning slightly backward is a good thing for students. Often they'll be working really hard to keep their fingers on the string, and you'll notice that perhaps their nails are touching the string, which makes them then slip and slide around. And so double check that the X is in a good spot, that they can see the line, that their fingernail friend is in a good position, and now that when their 3 fingers are down, they're feeling like they're leaning slightly back. Tap the thumb a couple of times, swing the elbow, and now the reason I said at first to play just 2 of those is because Professor Rowland used name rhythms and food rhythms and rhythms of phrases or words to encourage students to be creative in their practicing. So if you do a name rhythm, for example, I would first, perhaps if I had a class of students learning, I would have them play Mrs. May, Mrs. May, going up the scale, or how about I like blueberry pie? it's a little bit more fun. It gets them thinking creatively and also gives them some personal connection if they're using their name or the name of their family members or friends. So I encourage you to do that. One thing that I want to say about matching the octave is that matching can be a troublesome word. I just had a conversation with one of my students this past week, actually. As I was working with her, she was new to me. I've just started working with some new people, and she said, she's a 9th grade cellist, and she said, "Mrs. May, everybody always says match it, make it match. It doesn't match," she said. And I needed to hear a little bit more from her, but my assumption when she first said that was correct, in that it's not the same note. It's an octave apart, and she had heard that since beginning her cello playing, and she never understood what the teachers meant about matching the octave. So Professor Rowland doesn't say matching the octave. He says the octave game. And I discovered, at least with her, that the phrase that seemed to make more sense to her was to make it fit, to make it sound right together. And then we did some exploration of what's not good. So I highly encourage, and I think we saw this in the film, that students play out of tune, maybe not even intentionally, and that they then are encouraged to slide their finger until it sounds right or it fits. So think about the language that you use when you're teaching. But if we went up the scale and then played this and it sounds like it fits, then we smile. I often will tell the students, if you think it sounds good, smile. And if it doesn't sound right, make a face, and then start pulling it one way or the other, move it somewhere, sliding around. Okay, what is sliding? It's movement. It's movement in our body. It's a good thing to teach students how to slide around on the string right from this early stage, because that's what professionals do all the time, to make those quick split-second adjustments in intonation. So, thinking of rhythms, thinking of creating fun ways to practice, thinking of leaning the hand back and having good contact, good clinginess to the string, thinking about tapping the thumb and moving the elbow. These are all things that you want to be encouraging and repeating and reminding your students to do as they're learning this left hand position and shape. After you are able to teach them how to hold the bow, I'm going to pick up my bow now. You might do some separate bows. And you could do some slurs. Shifting then, so these are next stages of development. As your students are already doing shuttle from low to middle to high, let's do a few of the octave game with first position. Encourage them even to slide out of tune and then try to get it back in tune. Third position. Should be able to do that without looking at their fingers to see where those dots are. Maybe you don't have dots on them anymore when they're going to those different places on the instrument. Maybe you do. But the ultimate test is with the ear, and we always want to make sure that they understand that the dots are just guidelines, but playing so that the notes fit together with each other is our ultimate goal, that they sound right. So that's what we would do in the more advanced levels of the octave game, and of course the artistic application of octaves is to practice with a drone and to check the octaves with the open strings anytime we're playing something complicated and we want to make sure our hand has gone to the exact right position. Playing a fingered note with an open string will tell us whether it's in tune or not. Action 4 is called percussion play. Percussion play is something that professionals do to test notes before they actually draw their bow across the string. It's also used to encourage the speed of impact, where the finger is coming down quickly, not the force of the impact. I'm not going to ask students to pound their finger harder necessarily, unless they're very weak trying to add some energy, but it's really about the speed of the finger coming down. And so I would start in rest position and have students try to make a sound with their third finger, and that third finger on a violin or a viola will give them the octave, which means if it's in the right spot, then the sympathetic vibration of the adjacent string will be happening. We'll hear it better. So it's the speed of impact coupled with some good pads on the fingertips, and that takes a bit of time to develop for students. So they may not have a callus yet, and they may have tender fingers, so I wouldn't do too much at first, but encourage them to continue doing it over a period of time in lessons. And then having the student check it to see if it's in tune. So third finger for speed is strengthening the finger. It's also encouraging quickness. And now let's check for accuracy. And notice that the other two fingers don't have to be down. You can do this with all three, but typically when we start doing these percussion play exercises, we only want to use the third by itself. Both things are appropriate. Having all your fingers be able to move quickly together is a skill that we want our students to develop. But we don't want that to be the only skill. We also want them to be able to move just one finger at a time. So I would have them do this in rest position, and then check it, and then I would have them try it in playing position, check it there. The next step I would have them do is to pluck with the left hand on the string that is the open string that's going to be vibrating sympathetically, and after plucking there, then do the percussion play so that you don't need to strum with the right hand. This helps train the ear to listen carefully for the percussive sound to decide whether it's in tune or not. If I accidentally went out of tune, I might hear something like this. I could tell it was just a little bit too high. Let me see if I can get that better in tune. There, that sounded right. What if I went too low intentionally? I can hear it on my violin. Some violins, particularly student models, and if they're smaller instruments, it will be hard to hear when it goes out of tune, and it only will sound right when it's in tune because the other pitches won't resonate so well, which is also kind of a good thing that students know if it's in tune because it's resonating better with that sympathetic vibration. So percussion play is this left hand, swiftness of the left hand. The last action is in establishing the low second finger placement for violin and viola, And for the use of the second finger for cello and bass, what we will do is basically the same thing that we've done with our other fingers, but encouraging the student to feel what it feels like to place that second finger close to the first finger. Here's what often can be a really helpful thing to do is, instead of doing a first finger to a third finger and then putting the second finger down, that stretch right in there is a little bit more difficult, especially for young beginners. So encouraging them to play simple melodies that use a first finger and a low second finger only, without the third finger, is a good starting point. And in order to find melodies like that, one of Professor Rowland's creative ideas was to take a melody that's in a major key and just turn it into a minor key. The one that comes to mind is Mary Lost Her Little Lamb. It's also fun to make up names of the tunes. So I would start by having the students get their hand in position, shuttle a little bit, check their line, check their fingernail friend, and then put their second finger right next to the first finger, and let's do this on the A string and see what it sounds like. And that C, if you're on a viola, should sound like it's resonating with the C string. And on a violin, we can test it by going up. Let's do this with all string instruments, violin, viola, cello, bass. We can play the A string a couple of times. Let's do 2 bows on each. Then we'll do B, 2 bows, and then we'll do C, 2 bows. Now that's not difficult for students. What is difficult is if we went this far and told them they had to keep that second finger where it was. What I often will do, because of this problem here of this stretch that they're not able to do at the beginning level, and sometimes not even in a more advanced player, is allow them to let the second finger creep away from the first finger while playing the third. Because it's not going to sound any different, and some students don't know that. They might think that if their middle finger moves, it changes the sound of their third finger. So that's an important thing for them to understand, that it will not change whether my second finger is there, or there, or there. So it's okay for the second finger to split away from the first until I need to play it again, and then when I lift my third and I want a low 2, I have to slide it back again so that it will be close to the first finger. So, Mary Lost Her Little Lamb. Beginning, just stay on C. Poor Mary. So you can have some fun with these tunes that are in minor keys. Why do we call it She Lost Her Little Lamb? Well, it's a minor key. Okay, then we can have the discussion about how does a minor key make you feel compared to what a major key makes you feel, and then bringing in some examples of majors and minors so that your young students understand that music has an impact on our emotional feelings about things. And this is one way. And so using the minor key tunes, simple melodies, making faces and making it real, and having students maybe come up with their favorite song, and maybe it's in a major key, let's try playing it in a minor key, is all very good to connect with students and what they understand about music in general, and also then about their finger patterns. One final thing about this low second finger is to be sure that students understand about this curvature of the fingers. When their second finger is in the high position, which they have learned first, the second finger is reaching out. It's not as curved as it will have to be when it's back here. So teaching them that they need to do more clinging, more rounding, more bending of the second finger now to go together with the first finger is an important step. And as you saw on the film, they even put a line along the side of the finger, of the index finger. You could also do that with the second finger if you wanted to see just how curved it should be when it's back in its proper position. Always staying on the fingertip and not leaning backwards like this. So that concludes the descriptions of our establishing left hand and finger placement. The next session is going to be office hours, so I would encourage you to go and visit. The 3 people who will be doing office hours this next session will be Jerry Fishbach, Joanne Irwin, and yours truly. I will be there. So if you have questions now, we will stop the film and open up the next few minutes for questions and answers.